Hi, I'm Natasha, and today I am at the Exhibition Hub Art Center in Atlanta, and I am checking out Tutankhamun, his tomb and treasures. So, you might know that, like back in the 1920s or so, Howard Carter did some digging and found King Tut's tomb. And within that, there were like really great treasures. So you can see like his death mask, which I'm sure a lot of people have seen before, as well as like his sarcophagus, a number of artifacts and things like that. A lot of those artifacts are no longer allowed outside of the country, so they don't go on like touring exhibits or anything like that. If you want to see the real artifacts, you have to go to Egypt. And what they've done instead is there are some traveling exhibits where they have replicas of the artifacts that then travel around, which I think is a pretty good idea. These items are like thousands of years old, they're delicate and whatnot. The last thing you want is a lot of these artifacts, they rightfully belong to the places where they came from. And so I think it's fair that if you want to visit them, if you want to see them in person, to go to these countries rather than, these arguably colonialist places and whatnot, grabbing up this stuff and taking it to their countries and holding them there. But on the flip side, I think a good compromise is to make replicas of these items because they're old, so that way you don't have to worry about the originals being lost or decrease the possibility of the originals being lost, stolen, damaged, and whatnot. You keep them in their home countries where they're all in one place rather than having them torn about the world. And so I think it's actually a good idea that they came up with to have replicas of these items and have those be traveling exhibits. I think that's a pretty good compromise. So I am here now in Atlanta in the neighborhood of Doraville, which is just like right on the edge of the perimeter, in the, what would that be, northwest quadrant of the perimeter for the exhibit. And I'm going to go ahead and head on in. So let's see what they're talking about. So this visit was actually a pretty cool thing for me. Well, as a kid growing up, I was really into learning about ancient Egypt, pirates, Greek mythology, and also for a period of time like scary stories. So I was super into like the Goosebumps series. But when I was a kid, like elementary school, this kind of stuff was absolutely fascinating to me. I would try to find books about every and anything related to those topics. And so it's something that I still have an interest in. Over the years, as like I would see documentaries on be it the Discovery Channel or TLC and channels like that, I would watch them. I think it's been like quite some time before I've actually read a book about ancient Egypt, but it is something that I find interesting. And never mind, it's all these years later, it's still like one of the dream trips that I would like to take, actually going to Egypt and visiting and seeing some of these artifacts in person, visiting some of these places that I first read about when I was a kid. Last year, I attended the Harry Potter exhibition, and this year, as a part of, because I attended last year, I got an email this year before the show was supposed to open saying that it was coming to Atlanta. And every so often I'm looking for things to do. Coming here, this is actually like, aside from like I've been to the Met in New York many times, having grown up in New York, and then earlier this year I actually visited the British Museum. And in visiting the British Museum, part of why I was really excited to go to London was to go to the British Museum because I knew of the relationship between the British Museum and a lot of these artifacts from ancient Egypt that had been found in Egypt. And so I went knowing that they had quite a display of like ancient Egyptian information. I love museums and I like to learn. So coming in, from what I saw, like you walk into the first room and it gives you some background on ancient Egypt, the 18th dynasty, which King Tut was kind of like the end of. And first of all, you get an audio guide, and the audio guide provides information about various artifacts throughout the exhibit. But then there's also like murals and cards and info and whatnot posted on the wall, which you would then have to read. So based on just the first room alone, I thought it was pretty cool. There were just a few artifacts in that first room, but there's a wealth of information on the walls. You start off in one part learning about Howard Carter and sort of like an introduction to Howard Carter and the excavation, how it was that they came about locating King Tut's tomb. and then also the beginning of this thing, Curse of the Pharaohs, right, where both Howard Carter and then also and Lord Carnarvon, how they played a major part in the excavation of King Tut's tomb, and then also how as part of that they ended up dying. But like aside from that, there's like a lot of really great information about ancient Egypt, and then also about the like the layout of the various tombs, because King Tut might be the most well known because so many of his artifacts were found, but that there are actually quite a number of other pharaohs. And in this area where King Tut's tomb is located, it's called the Valley of the Kings. His tomb is there, yes, but you also have quite a number of different tombs. It's called the Valley of the Kings because it's the final resting place of a number of the pharaohs, pretty much for about 400 years, beginning with, it's believed to be Hatshepsut, that the pharaohs were buried in this area. And just to give you some context, Cairo is located more north, right, on the Nile, but further north towards the Mediterranean Sea. And right on the coast, you have Alexandria, right? But Cairo is actually a little bit more, for lack of a better term, inland, right? Not right on the coast of the Mediterranean. But then even further south, that's where you have, and that's the upper Nile, because the Nile flows northward, if I'm not mistaken. Further south on the map, down the Nile, that's where you have the Valley of the Kings. So I am actually curious after seeing this as far as what's it like to visit, because, well, I mean, would you even want to visit the Valley of the Kings? Because there's like excavation sites and tombs and things like that, but I'm not sure how much there is to see there. So it is something I'm curious to learn more about. This behind me here is actually like, it looks like probably an aerial photo of the Valley of the Kings, and this is like the excavation, I'm guessing, or rather some trucks and whatnot along the road there, or along the path there. And so this here is a map of the Valley of the Kings, where you see like the various tombs, and then here you have the Nile River, and you can see the Mediterranean Sea is like up here, right? Cairo is in this area here. Alexandria is up on the coast, but down here is where you have the Valley of the Kings, so it's actually quite inland, but accessible by water because it's on the Nile. So actually pretty interesting, because you have like these various different burial sites in the Valley of the Kings. So it's like, to put into context, it's like over the course of 400 years, the pharaohs that passed away, they would have been buried in this area here. So you have Queen Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Amenhotep, Tutankhamun, Seti, and then some of the Ramses, all buried in this area. So actually a lot of really interesting information. Like if you are a history buff, specifically, well, not just history, but if you like history and you also like art, I think it'd be interesting for you. I think as a history buff, there's a lot of information. I love this kind of stuff. When you come in, they have like a timeline that flows along one of the walls, which explains like the progression of the different kingdoms and over time who conquered and what was going on, who ruled, and all this kind of stuff. After you finish the first room, where there are a few artifacts, items on the wall to read and review and whatnot, you then continue on into a theater. And in this theater, you watch a video. Now, just bear in mind that, I think I might have mentioned it, but that first room, you want to take your time going through it. Make sure that you read everything, that you listen to the stuff on the audio guide, because once you go in for the film, you won't be able to go back into that room. It's like you move through the exhibit, but there's no going back. Point of no return. So just take your time. Although they'll announce it that the film is about to begin, just bear in mind that it plays every 10 minutes, so you don't have to feel rushed to watch it, because it reminded me of this school textbook where I guess previously I didn't know what the context of it was. I knew it had to do with King Tut, but I didn't know where the image exactly came from. So to see here and just randomly see this throne with this inlay, I thought was actually pretty cool. And so you move on beyond that, and that is actually the antechamber. So I think that's like when you first come in, and there's actually a diagram of what the tomb looked like, and that's it here. So when they entered the tomb, how the different rooms were laid out, and what they did was that they took like very detailed recordings of where all of the items were in the room, took down like very detailed descriptions of the individual items as well. And so here is sort of like the layout of the rooms here, and so they've kind of recreated it here. And it's actually pretty cool because you finish watching the video, you walk into this room, and then you have these 3 rooms here. So here you have behind me the antechamber to give you an idea of what it looked like when Carter and company walked into the tombs and saw them for the first time in what would have been thousands of years. But when you come here, it's set up to look like how it looked in the room. So it's like, imagine when you walk in, the room is dark, and you, be it light a match, turn on a bulb or something like that, and suddenly the room is illuminated, and you just see all of this gold, and there's like hieroglyphics on the walls and all that kind of stuff. So pretty cool and interesting. There's like some statues where they're like black, but like with a bunch of like gold inlaid. So here you have like a number of like beds that are covered with gold. You have like some statues and whatnot. There's a chariot that's dismantled, but that's gold inlaid as well. And then there is actually a throne where when I saw it, it immediately stood out to me because I remember in junior high school that we had a textbook with like the inlay on the cover of the textbook. And so I saw that and I thought like it was actually, I smiled. And so here you now have the gilded coffins, or I think they were referred to as like a sarcophagus. And so it turns out that it's actually made from solid gold. It took like a system of pulleys and levers to lift them open because they were so heavy because they're solid gold. Though I will say I think the setup is pretty terrible because the audio guide is timed, so you have to rush through at like the pace of the audio guide. You can't stop and look at things along the way, and as you can see, like the exhibits are timed, so like the lights switch on and off even while you're standing and trying to look at things. So that part of it I'm actually pretty disappointed in. Like, you should be able to walk through at your own pace, and you should be able to pause the audio guide and to take a little bit longer looking at particular items rather than being rushed through. Now, to be quite honest, some of the stuff, like in the rooms they set up, it kind of looks like if you imagine like somebody's junky basement or a garage. Because now granted, they explain like there's rhyme and reason to the items that are in the various rooms, but like when you walk in, it's like just stuff piled up. It looks like somebody's storage room. So it's like you'll have the beds with various items piled onto it. But granted, some of that could be that, especially for like some of the more outer chambers, that grave robbers went in. And what you're seeing is them having, tried to take things apart to remove them from the tomb, and, kind of probably throwing things about haphazardly. Maybe it might have been better organized and neater when King Tut was first buried. But like the way that it's set up now, some of the stuff just looks like it's all hodgepodge and it's just like, piled up all over the place and whatnot. But what you learn and what you find is that everything had like a purpose within the rooms, and so it's like you have containers where like the internal organs were stored, and it's actually like a golden box with like quite some intricate carvings on the exterior. And you have like some boats which are similar to the boats that would have been used on the Nile, but they're like more miniature versions. You have like the presence of certain gods and deities from ancient Egyptian, their polytheistic religion that you see here, where there's great importance played on the afterlife. placed on the afterlife. And so you see various figures from this journey that the bodies of the deceased are believed to take. So here you have, this is like the outside of a reproduction of one of the shrines within the tomb. And when you look at it, it's actually like really impressive. So these illustrations on the wall, and then in addition to that, hieroglyphics. But when you look at this thing, it's like a pretty fair sized room, right? And this is actually where the sarcophagus was. But you look at the walls, and this is obviously a reproduction, so I'm not sure what they made it with. You can see like the ceiling with like the, they created like a roof structure. It's not like gold or whatever. And I imagine this isn't either because it'd be super expensive. But it's like, you look at it, it's a fair sized room, and it's like, if you think of gold leaf in the present, right? But it's like gold, it's inlaid gold on the walls, on the outside of the shrine, and then there's like hieroglyphics and stuff. So if you look at this, you can see there's like hieroglyphics, like little carvings into it. And imagine that this was gold. You have like this whole room with like just sheets of gold on the wall, all on the outside. It's like very nice, intricate carvings of hieroglyphics, just like a lot of attention to detail. But you look at it and it's like, bro, like this stuff, it was like gold. Well, not like, it was gold. So just like very expensive. And it's like, I think about people in the present with like some of these funerals and weddings and things like that. It's like they might be doing it big, but I don't think most people are doing it this big. You know, and you imagine like this is a shrine inside of his tomb. But as is explained, it's just that his tomb was found more intact than some of the tombs of the other pharaohs. But that these shrines seem to have been placed within the tombs of most of the pharaohs. They're very fair size, very intricate, very ornate. So it's actually like very, very impressive when you think of it. It's one thing to read about, it's one thing to see in like documentaries and things like that. It's something else to come and see things in person where you get an idea of the real size and scale. Like just very, very impressive. And you walk through and there's like more and more information, not just about the burial process, but also about religion and culture within ancient Egypt, you know, with like Akhenaten and him trying to bring in this whole thing of moving from being a polytheistic religious state to being monotheistic, and then under Tutankhamun, the return to that polytheistic culture and like the social upheaval and the politics of it and people being overthrown and being put into power and all this kind of stuff. It's actually like very, very interesting. And then in addition to that, you look at it that it's kind of interesting when you think about it, where throughout eternity, from the beginning of time, death has been really the only constant, right? And it's interesting to see how different cultures deal with that, where I think in the present, like if you're religious, if you're a Christian or something like that, there's some focus on the afterlife in the sense of this idea of going to heaven, and then for some people they think about heaven and hell, but it's this thing at the end of your life, you know. There's not a lot, like sure you might save up money for like your funeral and your burial, you'll maybe pick out a plot or something like that, make arrangements, get life insurance or whatever, but we don't prepare for death to the degree and with the level of detail that they did back then, you know. And it's like, I can't think of, granted I haven't been to like that many funerals, but I can't think of, even when you think of like celebrity funerals, they're nowhere on par with this kind of stuff, you know. Like I don't care how rich you are, you're not doing all of this when you die, you know. And so it's interesting to see that, at least for the pharaohs, that even in living, so much of their focus was on the afterlife, you know, that from the time they ascended to the throne, plans were made for their eventual burial. So it's actually like really interesting to see. And so you walk through and it's like you have multiple shrines, these, if you think of it like golden rooms, where, you know, like the first one, the biggest one, that's like where the the coffin was. But then you actually have like two others that are a bit smaller but no less intricate, right? And you just imagine these things being made out of gold. Like, number one, the craftsmanship. How do you even make something like this? That's the first thing. If you think of it in terms of our current day money, the cost of making something like this, just with regards to the material, right? And then it's like the craftsmanship and the intricacy, and you think about it that this is like thousands of years ago. I have no idea how to make anything from gold, right? Much less to craft things like this. And you see like the gold wraps around and it's like all carved out. You got like nice sharp edges, you have these different carvings and things like that. How do you make all of that, right? Like, it's actually very, very impressive. And so now here you have the actual coffins. So as you move through the exhibit, there are shrines, like these golden box room situations, right? And each one of them on the outside has hieroglyphics that tells like the story of this journey into the afterlife and some other information as well. But here you then have the coffins from the burial, and like I said, these are some of the items that are more familiar to people, like the things that you see when they discuss King Tut and the pharaohs and whatnot. So to begin with, the way that it works is that if you think of like nesting dolls, like matryoshka dolls, right? Those dolls where you open up the bigger one and inside there's a smaller one, you open that, there's a smaller one, and so you start with like something that's this big, and as you work through each one you get down to something like this small as you get through the different layers. And so you start out with this stone sarcophagus, right? And it's pretty much like, this is like the tomb, right? It's pretty much like a coffin. It's stone, and you have like carvings on the outside. If you look at the carvings of the shrines, you notice that they're like carved in, right? They're engraved. Whereas if you look at the carvings here, it's like they whittled away some of the material. You do have some like engravings, but there's also some, let's say, embossing where it's like relief, right? It's more like three-dimensional rather than being carved in. And so you have this is like the most outer part of the burial coffin. And then you have like these nesting coffins inside where you have like this larger coffin here, and bearing in mind that these things are solid gold, so they're like super heavy. This outer coffin, the outermost coffin, I think like the entire thing, like all of the coffins and whatnot, are like 2,700 pounds plus, right? And so you have this solid coffin on the outside that rests on this bed situation here. It's like a lion themed bed. And so you have like a lion's head, lion's tail, and that's actually wood, but it's inlaid, like covered with gold. And so you have that supporting the enormous weight of this outer coffin. And so that outer coffin was then placed inside the sarcophagus. But then, so you had the sarcophagus, and inside of that you had this outer coffin. But then within that outer coffin, you then have this like this inner coffin, where this one doesn't, there is some gold, but there's like different colored inlays and things like that, and you have like different displays of artistry here. So on the outer coffin you have like some really detailed carvings into the gold itself, and then on this inner coffin you have where it's like, it's not just solid gold, right? There's like a mixture of some color and whatnot. And then you have the actual mummy, which lays within that. So it's like pretty much 3 layers of coffins, then plus the sarcophagus. And so the coffins were pretty much supposed to function as like protection for the body, like another, think of like a body in the afterlife, but like a protective vessel for the journey into the afterlife. And so within this innermost coffin, you actually have the mummy. And usually when you think of like mummies, right, like you think of movies, they're depicted as being wrapped in like this white linen and whatnot. But imagine that over the years you've been all laid up inside of this tomb and stuff. You know, they've essentially embalm the body, preserve the body. But as it's mentioned, like they would spray perfumes and there'd be other kinds of oils and whatnot. And so it's like when you walk up to it and you see like this inner, like the actual mummy itself, the body itself, it looks kind of gross because it's like you have like these linen bandages, but they're not like white as you think they would be. It's like a brownish color. I don't know what like the stuff is, but there's like little, it kind of looks like muddy, you know, or like cake batter actually. And so you look at it, and I'm guessing that it's like from the liquids and the preservatives and whatnot that they put on it. But it's kind of interesting to see because the depiction that you see of mummies in like movies and on TV shows, it's actually different when you see the bandages in person, because they look like dirt if you think of it, right? Like if you were to take dirt and make like a mud situation and rub it over bandages, that's what this looks like. It's not like the white linen look that you might typically see when mummies are depicted. So that was kind of different. But the artistry, the gold in person, it's a little duller than you might think or you might see, but like when I photographed it, you see like quite a bit of the shine. In person, the sheen of the gold is a little bit muted, but you can see like the intricacy of the detail, like the carving and whatnot, the artistry that goes into it. And then you have like these little pops of color, which is like inlays within the gold. So it's like, again, it's one thing to see pictures or to watch documentaries. It's something else to see in person. And bearing in mind that even at that, these are like replicas, which it speaks to the artistry of the original people that made like the real items, but then also like much respect to the people that made these replicas, because like the level of detail is really dope actually. All in all, I would say it was a pretty good experience. I took a really long time to work my way through the exhibit. The reason being that I was recording along the way, I was taking pictures, I was like fumbling around. I had like my DSLR camera, my cell phone, which I was recording video with, and then also the audio guide, and moving between all those different things kind of took a bit of work. I stopped along the way as well to take some selfies, to take some pictures that I knew I would need for like the end video and whatnot, and so it took me a good little bit. In addition to that, when you first enter, it looks like the exhibit won't be like much to walk through, as there is the first room that you come into, there's the little theater where you spend, it's probably less than 10 minutes watching a video, and then you have about like 3 more rooms to work your way through. Well, 4 rooms or so. But in going through, you could certainly go through at your own pace, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything. So I looked at all of the items, I read just about all of the text that was posted on the walls, though I didn't listen to each and every stop on the audio guide. And in addition to that, I had some issues with the audio guide as far as getting it to play where I wanted it to. I kind of double back through one of the rooms because like the lights were shutting off on its own, and you know, I didn't have a chance to see the stuff, so I had to walk through that room pretty much twice. So that kind of threw off my timing. I think for most people, budgeting, I would say I think an hour isn't enough time. Not if you want to take your time. I would say maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours. You could comfortably get through the exhibit in that time. And I would say like it was pretty enjoyable. My ticket worked out to be say $33. It was $32 and some change. And the price that you pay for your ticket, and these were adult tickets, varies based on what day of the week you visit. Weekends are most expensive. You have a second tier for weekdays, and then the cheapest day I want to say would be Tuesdays. No, not Tuesdays. The cheapest day I want to say would be, I think it's like Mondays and Wednesdays or something like that. I'll double check the price and let you know. But even within that, I didn't realize it when I went onto the website because I had another appointment in the morning, and so I drove to the exhibit space, and while I was in the parking lot, that's when I got my ticket, because it's timed entry and I didn't want to get into a situation of buying the tickets far in advance and then either I get into an issue with traffic, I get delayed at my appointment, and then I don't get here in time and it's a problem. So I waited until I got here and I just bought tickets for the next available time slot, which was 1 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. And at that, the ticket price was like $33. But when I got in and I looked at the breakdown of prices, you have two different tiers of prices based on days. The exhibit is closed on Tuesday, so that day is completely out. But you have two different breakdowns based on days, where the weekends are more expensive, earlier in the week less expensive. But then even on the day that I visited, the time at which you visit affects your price as well. So I could have come a little bit, maybe like an hour and a half or so later, and paid about $5 less. I want to say the time for that lower tier pricing in the afternoon is about like 2:30. But I had other stuff to take care of. I didn't want to have to rush through, and so I decided to just go on ahead and see it at the earliest time that was available for me. All in all, I thought it was a great experience. I enjoyed myself. There are a few little things that I didn't really like. I felt like the exhibit itself was fine, but what I would change would be maybe the audio guide. Lots of information, but with listening, I felt like number one of the voices I didn't really like. I felt like his voice was like kind of dry and boring. The audio guide, I think lots of really insightful information, useful information, a lot of knowledge being shared, but I think like a better job could have been done with the actual reading of the text. It's like one of the guys, there's a lady, her voice is quite fine, she's a little bit more animated and energetic, but there's a guy where his voice is just, I think, incredibly boring, and I found myself like kind of getting a little bit tired listening to his voice. But the information contained was fine, so if you could soldier through, that's fine. The only thing I would improve, if I had to offer one point where they could improve, is just like rework the audio guide and make the device where you can better control the audio, where you can more easily start and stop, or if you're listening to one number and you want to move on to another, make it easier to stop that item and move on to another, stop on the tour. But aside from that, I don't really have any other complaints. I thought it was very insightful. I thought it was very interesting. It's a good opportunity to, I think, whet your appetite. And I probably won't be going to Egypt anytime soon, but I think it's a good holdover until then. And having come and seen the exhibit, it kind of re-sparked this passion for ancient Egyptian history that I had from childhood. And I've always had it as like a dream trip in the back of my mind that I eventually would like to go to Egypt and see some of these items in person for myself. But until then, I think this was a pretty good alternative. And so with that, I recommend the exhibit. It's not perfect. There are some things that could be improved, but I think there's enough there that would make the visit enjoyable. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes are available on the Noir Histoire website via the link in the episode description. If you enjoyed this episode and want more book recommendations, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my book review playlist.